I'll get started because I want everyone to have plenty of questions for Michael and Tetsuro, and we also have to check out some of us. So now for something completely different. I'm pulling the lens way out, especially on the two presentations that preceded me. We're going to go way, way far out and then a little further than that because I'm combining two things a lot of people apparently have never thought of combining before, and that is Henry Miller and romance, and I'm sure we all can understand why those two things, which are both, I think, lacking, definitely for romance, and I think also for Miller, lacking in broad scholarship generally. So the idea that no one has put the two together is not groundbreaking, but I'm very excited about it. I think it's pretty illuminating. I hope it raises some questions, opens some doors, and even if you don't agree, I think there's a lot of applications for this kind of analysis, and it's fun. So, Henry Miller, Bodice Ripper, it's a little glitchy, free speech, romance novels, and the unexpected legacy of Miller in the 21st century. There are only three things to be done with a woman. You can love her, suffer for her, or turn her into literature. As we know, Henry did all three all the time. Wisdom of the heart and the loins. My intention is to illuminate a neglected intersection of literary scholarship, the confluence of Miller's work and legacy with the steamy landscape of the modern romance novel. I'm very proud of the graphics. This is very exciting. This is a quote from Miller in A Literate Passion, one of his letters to Anais. "It is true I swim in a perpetual sea of sex, but the actual excursions are fairly limited." I don't know who was here last night when we learned that he slept with only 40 to 50 women in his life. Yes, I thought that was a surprising number. He lived a long time. I think it's more like this, that I'm always ready to love, always hungry to love. I'm talking about love, not just sex, and I don't mind at all saturating my work with it, sex I mean, because I'm not afraid of it, and I almost want to stand up and preach about it. And I don't know that he did, but I will. Why Henry? So someone asked me earlier in the conference why maybe D.H. Lawrence, wouldn't he have been perhaps a better candidate for this kind of analysis? And I'll get into the reasons why. I actually think Henry, of all the male authors of the early 20th century, is the most vital and powerful for this kind of analysis, and that he had, whether implicitly or perhaps in more tangible ways, had an impact in the genesis of the modern romance genre. That's what this is about. So he broke down, his legal case, Grove Press versus Gerstein, broke down legal barriers, his obviously literary barriers in the texts that he wrote, the language he used, broke down the barriers to sexually explicit material. He also championed other authors whose works were also informative and groundbreaking in this realm. And his life, philosophy, legacy, and works also celebrate the deeply human and complex inner workings of all of us in ways that support, parallel, and inform modern romance novels specifically. And that's not very useful if you don't know very much about romance as a genre, not just maybe the one particular author or type of romance that you like, but the more broad structures. It's been called by some scholars, and there's not that many, but scholars have referred to the genre of romance as an ecosystem in itself, and the idea that, what makes romance so unique is that it stands apart as a double outlier, both much larger and much more modular, much busier internally than any other major genre of fiction. Only the fiction and nonfiction groups in their entirety, like all of fiction, all of nonfiction, present such a combination of large size and elaborately subdivided internal structure. That was from the University of Pennsylvania, did a study on it a couple years ago. So, despite romance being so vast, it is hugely, hugely under-respected, minimal scholarship. Not only is it vast in terms of its content, but it's also a juggernaut of publishing. Romance, by and large, keeps publishing houses alive. Mid-level romance sells more than any other corner of publishing. A lot of publishing houses, as I mentioned with A Court of Thorns and Roses, a lot of publishing houses are kept in the black by romance, which also then enables them, they can afford to publish more higher-minded or respected literary content because romance readers are eating this stuff up like candy. It's very popular. Much like Henry Miller's works, romance novels often feature complicated explorations of the human condition and relationships, including graphic sexual content and passion in all its forms. Romance is the genre of genres, oh, there we go, veritable ecosystem in its own right. What is romance? We asked earlier about one-handed reads. Can be romance. The definition of romance, according to the RWA, Romance Writers of America, which is the overseeing professional body in the US, it has corollaries in Australia and the UK. But here in America, it is step one, a central love story. Plot A has to be the love story. And two, you have to have an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. And that's where a lot of people go astray. They think Dr. Zhivago or Wuthering Heights is a romance novel, and those are love stories. Those are romances. They are not romance novels because they do not meet the second requirement, and it is technically essential. If you try to write a romance and it's a tragedy, you will not sell. Like readers, because it's genre fiction, tropes are incredibly important. Expectations are really the heart of the readership, and what they want, it's not sexual, which, you know, again, one-handed thing. Erotica, what they're expecting is a sexual satisfaction. With romance, it is an emotionally satisfying one, and that can include the craziest sex you've ever read in your life, or a very chaste kiss between a school marm and a cowboy. You know, like there's something for absolutely everyone. I don't think it has to be valued just by its financial power, but I do think that that's a way to easily explain to people why this is important. 2022, 53% of book sales were fiction, and of the fiction, over a third were romance. That's $1.4 billion annually only for print sales, and the market for ebooks and audiobooks is absolutely massive. So what you're looking there, like, we don't actually know how much romance sells because the largest retailer, Amazon, doesn't want to tell us. It's billions and billions of dollars annually just for this particular genre. More stats here I don't have time to go all into, but 18% of readers are men, which you wouldn't expect. And a lot of them are women, highly educated, middle-aged women, but the readership is also skewing younger, which, for all that we talk about Gen Z and the youth wanting to live in TikTok and their phones, they actually love print books. Like, a lot of young women in particular are finding that holding a physical book, the books have gotten, I don't know if you've been to Target lately, but they have foil on them. They're just beautiful, almost special editions of even standard books now, because people they want a tactile experience to counter, I think, the digital one, but that's not the purpose of this talk. Romance goes back to ancient times. Some of the first really kind of recognizable ones go back to women authors in the 16th century. We know Jane Austen wrote the book of the structures of what we expect from a plot and some of the key tropes of romance. Victorians were really into romantic stories, but by and large, they viewed a really romantic story being dying at the end. So they're a forebear, but not what we have now. In the 20th century through the 1960s, there was a lot of erotic literature. Obviously, people like Miller, Lady Chatterley's Lover. There were a lot of books coming out in that period that were pushing those boundaries of what sexual content and depictions of female sexuality could be, but they still don't fit the definition of modern romance. And Mills and Boon was a big publisher in the UK. They started around that period. A lot of called category romances, which are very slender, and they would just churn those out. But mostly closed door, which is what we call it when there's not explicit sex on the page. Open doors, obviously, when there is. And spice is the trending term for sex, because I guess TikTok and Instagram will let you talk about spicy books more than super sexy books. Gang gets spicy. This is kind of covered this already, but Lawrence, Miller, Nin were some of the writers who were really pushing these boundaries, even though, as we know, Miller, at least, who was maybe the most graphic, perhaps used the most four-letter words. I'm not sure if anyone studied that. He was banned, so his impact at this contemporaneous time was stymied. Taboos, after all, are only hangovers, the product of diseased minds, you might say, of fearsome people who hadn't the courage to live and who, under the guise of morality and religion, have imposed these things upon us. Lord of Scoundrels is a great book if you want to start with a historical romance. Highly recommend it. Censorship ends. For time, I'm not going to go too far into this. A lot of you know about the obscenity cases in this mid-century period. Grove Press versus Gerstein was the case that got Tropic of Cancer unbanned in the United States and viewed it as having sufficient literary merit to be allowed. And over the course of these cases, we see the ability for really graphic explanations of sex on the page. And it's not just about sex. I mean, those four-letter words can be used in all kinds of ways, but the boundaries of what was allowed in popular fiction and public and commercial fiction were really blown open over the course of these cases, and Grove Press, as we know, was very vital in that process. Pay attention to the timeline here. That's all, a little over 15 years or so. During this period, you would think 64, maybe romance is picking up on the free love, starting in the early 60s, but actually it took a little time to get traction. In the 60s, Harlequin, who you may be familiar with in America, they bought Mills and Boon in the late 60s, but there was a real traditional streak in romance publishing. They eschewed the sort of free love of the 60s, which is strange, but it took a while to get traction. I mean, these cases, just because they came out, someone mentioned earlier that they found their mom had, the brown paper wrapped copies of Tropic of Cancer under her bed, but it takes a while for that stuff to get out, and certainly when you're dealing with the very gendered realm of romance where women would be feeling extra pressure to maybe not push the envelope or get traction if they attempted it, it takes a little time for that stuff to percolate. So you still had the sort of chaste closed-door romances and very housewife-based romances in the 1960s, and then a couple of Gothics, which were allowed to get a little more dramatic, and the whole genre really pivoted more in the Gothic direction. Henry's influence, as we go along here, you see there were his works, to the text, promotion of other authors, his life, his philosophy. I'm going to run out of time, so we're going to move a little faster. His language, I would love it if someone ever did a really textual analysis of maybe the impacts of the way he used words and the words he used on some romance novels. But beyond just, like I said, the four-letter words and the descriptors and language he was able to use, his content also reflected a really rich vastness and detail of human life. He talks a lot about bodily fluids. He talks a lot about these experiences that in themselves are taboo, and obviously there's a lot of stuff people don't want to talk about sex, and romance novels paint a very rosy vision of sex, but you also, it is more down to earth in the sense that, as women we're more in tune with our bodies, whether by choice or not, in a lot of ways, I think, and romance novels can reflect that. So it really, his immersion in the taboo in every element of humanity, even if it was sordid, really laid the groundwork for the accepting atmosphere that enabled the romance novel, which is an incredibly accepting genre. All right. He also was a proponent of a lot of other authors. Obviously, we know D.H. Lawrence, but other authors and figures in his life who were also pushing these boundaries, whether he helped them out literally or he was, writing letters with them, supporting them. I think collectively we know about that. He was a lover of life. This actually is super important to me, is that he, more so than Lawrence, more so than any other male author of that period, personally embraced the second element of what a romance novel is, and that is the optimistic and emotionally satisfying ending. He was a man who was looking for his own happily ever after. I don't know that he ever found it, but I think he was always searching. We had a few speakers, especially talking about the impact Big Sur had on his life and writing, that he was a really irrepressible optimist. He was a very hopeful person, and he was always searching for love. What Henry had that the others so resented was wholeness, his exuberance, the happiness that comes across in his work was visible in him even when he was old and ill. The voice he found expressed the abundance of the man. It was not the sex the Puritans hated and feared, it was the abundance. And that actually could very much be said about the genre of romance almost exactly. He was complicated. We all know his personal life. There were a lot of women, and he was obsessed with women his whole life, loved women, obviously was very interested in sex. And on face value, obviously, you would think that has a lot to do with romance novels. But again, I think that it's the deeper through lines that go through his life and his work that resonate most strongly with the romance genre. And he, in putting taboo language to it, really gave voice to the ecosystem that enabled romance to exist. So we get to The Flame and the Flower. 1972, Kathleen Woodiwiss took those ideas of Gothic romance, I don't know, I would love to find out if she had read Miller. I would guess that she probably had, but I haven't confirmed that yet. And she wrote the first Bodice Ripper. And I will tell you, it's dated. The way they got around a woman's virtue and purity was she usually got raped or sort of raped, and at that point she was a free woman and she could have fun the rest of the book. We don't do it that way anymore, but at the time, it sold. I don't have time to read the numbers on here right now, but it was massive, millions and millions of copies. It blew the whole thing wide open, as my husband would say. Romance today, you can see the sales charts, and that doesn't even go all the way back. It's going increasingly up. Again, even though some say publishing is dying, romance is not. The average romance reader reads a book a week, and that's just the average. A large percentage read up to a book a day. Over a third have, I think it's 40%, have a copy of a book, a romance novel in their purse, on their person at any given time. There's such a variety. I mean, I can't even, we could have a whole talk just about like how much variety there is of the genre and what it expresses. But that also, I think, speaks to Miller in that just that the Asleep and Awake documentary in his bathroom, the variety of life experience that we see even just in his bathroom in the Palisades. He was a man who really took like a sponge from everything in the life and human experience, and that is what romance does. Again, I think more than any other genre. What would he think of this? I don't know. If you do, I would love to hear. I kind of think maybe he wouldn't, I think maybe he would be derisive of it in some regard because it's so commercial. But then I also think if you explained it to him the right way, he might be like, fuck yeah, that's cool. I don't know. I do think if he had read more romance, and this is actually a tip I think for all, particularly the men in the audience, if you want to know what women want, read some romance because there's a lot of variety. And women, it's largely women writers in romance, not exclusively, but they, majority women writers, and they're telling you what they would like from their life experience. And obviously everyone's individual, but broad strokes, it's often given short shrift as being, again, because it's trope-based, that it's a very superficial, maybe silly, kind of flippant genre, and often considered conforming because the majority of them are heterosexual monogamous romances. Increasingly, that's not the case. There literally is everything. There was one the other day about a woman who fell in love with a tree. It's very diverse. But it's a genre that is very subversive. It's very rebellious. And even in that period, in the 60s, say, where it was still holding on to the surface level markers of a more traditional mindset, and some people have, early feminist critics were really, hot on the idea that this was demeaning to women as a genre, but even in those times where on the surface it looked like it might be reinforcing these dominant narratives, it wasn't, in my view and the view of many later scholars, because you were seeing women with agency. You were seeing the way that women were operating in a world that was ruled by these factors and ruled by men, and how, again, it's both, like Miller, it's both very real and also highly kind of romanticized at the same time. And very rebellious and subversive, that romance novels are often a way for women to address not just their life experiences, but also the injustices that they face. And again, gentlemen, what they might like at the end of a really good date. So his legacy in the 21st century, we don't know. Again, I'm still working on my paper on this, so I'd love to hear from you. Was he a forefather of modern romance? I think unequivocally yes. The question is how textual, how specific, how, the elements of proof we can draw from besides the broader thematic elements that I've identified so far. And considerations for further research. I'd love to look at other authors and their impact on romance, like, what did D.H. Lawrence, how would this analysis differ? Other legal precedents, again, there's all those other court cases, other elements of the jurisprudence, particularly in this country, that would be really informative to look at in this context. And then Henry's impact on other genre fiction. I thought about this for a while, and I was like, I don't think he had anything, I don't know that he really impacted sci-fi that much. But if he did, that's the kind of question that I would really like to raise in people's minds, that these things, this sort of cross-genre analyses, I think, are actually really vital and important, because people are reading Miller, people are reading romance, and these are part of a rich lived-in experience as humans, as readers, as publishers, and I think it does a great disservice to the scholarship as a whole to neglect maybe these corners that we haven't thought about before. So that is it. One thing we can never get enough of is love, and the one thing we can never give enough is love. And as you all know, love recurs over and over again, even in the dirtiest, angriest moments of his books. Love is, I think, at the core of Henry Miller's work. It's certainly at the core of the romance genre, and I think it's often at the very core of who we are as human beings. So that's it. Thank you very much.